from lunch. I'm really excited to be moderating this particular panel for a number of reasons. The first is that we've spent a lot of time so far today talking about the issue, framing the problem, and sort of, talking a lot about it. And now we're going to shift a little bit, and we're actually going to start talking about some solutions and some things that are currently happening that are really quite amazing. So today, joining me, I just have to make sure I get everyone's title right. Dun, dun, dun. I have Anna Leva, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Office of Special Needs. So I left out a word. Special Needs Assistant?
Special Needs, that's it.
Office of Special Needs at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Thanks. I promise I had that on a card, but I think it fell out of my pocket on the way up to the stage. I just reviewed their titles with them. So, Meredith Hicks, the Director of Planning and Policy at Lighthouse Youth Services in Cincinnati. Kelly King Jackson, Program Officer at the Simmons Foundation in Houston, Texas. And Jeffrey Poirier, the Principal Researcher at the American Institutes for Research and heads up their LGBT division. Yeah. So we're going to talk about a project that is working to prevent LGBT youth homelessness from happening in the first place. And I'm really lucky because I get the pleasure of spending lots of time with these beautiful people in DC and in Houston and in Cincinnati working on this project. And I can't wait for you to hear from them. So you're not going to hear any more from me. We're going to go directly into this panel. And we're going to start with you, Anne. So Anne, can you just tell us a little bit about where this idea, this LGBT youth homelessness prevention initiative came from?
Sure. In 2012, my then Assistant Secretary, Mercedes Marquez, invited me to a meeting, and I wasn't quite sure what it was about, but she told me Cindy Loper was going to be there, and I'm a woman in my 40s who grew up in Philadelphia, and I was like, hell yeah, I'm going to a meeting with Cindy Loper. And at that meeting, you actually saw a video from that day in the True Colors video that they showed at the beginning. Cindy and her team were going around and talking to various and sundry government groups about what the True Colors Fund wanted to do and the work that they wanted to undertake. And I met Gregory Lewis that day, and we sort of just struck up a relationship. And if any of you have ever had a pitch from Gregory Lewis, there's just no way to say no. He is really, really good at what he does. And so we actually just started meeting and talking about the overlap between what True Colors was looking to do and what HUD can do. And earlier, somebody on one of the panels talked about the government has big coffers, right? So I happen to be one of those offices that has kind of big coffers. I run a $2 billion program that serves all homeless people across the country. It's HUD's homeless office, the Office of Special Needs Assistance Programs. I also now have purview over the Housing Opportunities for Persons Living with AIDS program. So we started talking, and one day at our table, I said, I don't have new money to put on the table. It was, it's been a couple of tight budget years, but I feel like sometimes when I ask people to do things, just because I have a lot of money, like in the grand scheme of things, they actually do it. And I think that, some of you did it. So we started talking about how to use the Emergency Solutions Grants program to focus a little bit on homelessness prevention for LGBT youth. And what I was struck by when Gregory came to see me and my team was really the information that they had, the work that they had done around the country to look into this issue and to come up with some data for us to sort of sink our teeth into. And the sort of passion behind the idea. And I am not risk averse. In my little world, there are lots of people that are risk averse, and I happen to not be one of them. So I think we just sort of took a leap of faith together, and we thought we would figure it out. And then one of my staff members is here, Matt Aronson, who is really the lead for us within the SNAP's office. We asked our folks to run with it, and before I knew it, we had a team of federal partners, HHS, Department of Justice, HUD, USICH, working together, bringing folks in to educate us about models that work, and how homelessness prevention, which generally we don't do well in the homeless services community, could really be different, and how it looked different for this particular population. And so, again, we took a leap of faith and let our staffs run with it. And then Jama came on board, and the next thing I knew, we have sites chosen, and it's 2 years later. So that's how it started.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a social worker, so I believe in the power of relationships. And I think really what this points to, and that you were saying that is so lovely, is that I think this is all a really organic progression in the building of relationship and sharing a common vision for where we wanted to go and a common goal. So Anne mentioned that we had sites. We have people up here from Cincinnati and from Houston. So Jeff, I'm wondering if you could just talk to us briefly about why Cincinnati and Houston.
Sure. So early on in the process, the federal partners that Anne mentioned, as well as True Colors Fund and the technical assistance team, talked about what would be the objective way of selecting or reaching out to communities to participate in this initiative. So together we identified a list of communities, just as a starting place, that had no programmatic concerns and would also be seen as communities that would be sort of different than sort of your typical communities where this work might occur. So although we love New York, we love Los Angeles, those are communities where this work's already happening, and they're more atypical. So really looking at those communities where that are atypical and more likely to be successful. The criteria we looked at ranged from demographics and geographic location to their performance on grantee programming, such as street outreach, runaway and homeless youth programs, the quality of their continuum of care. So really looking at their infrastructure and their existing capacity to be successful, because that was a key ingredient, is do they have some capacity in place already that we have a good indicator that they could be successful with this initiative. And then there were about 12 communities nominated. The communities were all ranked across those criteria. And then we were really delighted, the federal partners were delighted that Hamilton County, Ohio, and Harris County, Texas, which were the top two on the list, were invited to participate and agreed to.
All right. So what you all don't know, but everyone up here is very aware of, is that the communities had 6 months to engage in a strategic planning process. And today, September 30th, is the day that the plans are due. So thank you for being here. And I'm wondering if we could just go down the line and each person give me a one-word description of, as best you can, one to 4 word description of how you're feeling. The plans are due today. How are you feeling?
Nervous, excited, and probably hopeful.
Yes.
Well, I brought mine up here because I'm just thrilled to have engaged in this fast and furious 6-month process and just feel really relieved and happy to share this with you all and to share it with HUD and our partners.
I am so incredibly excited about this. A lot of times as a government official, I don't get to do super exciting work that's, all of my work is meaningful to me, but to actually have participated in something like this that's really innovative and that is going to make a big difference at the community level is so exciting to me. And I actually read your plans, both of them, on the plane on the way here. They might have been in draft, but I read them anyway. And I'm looking forward to the success that these communities are going to have. I know that was more than 4 words. I'm sorry.
You can have that. So I wanted to turn to Meredith for a minute and the work that you're doing in Cincinnati. And I'm just wondering if you can share with us your initial reaction to this invitation to participate in this initiative.
Mm-hmm. So this was an interesting process because one day we received a letter via email, kind of out of the blue about it, and we were reading it, this 6-month opportunity, did we want to do it? And our absolute impulse was yes, with an exclamation mark. This is an issue that we've been working on at Lighthouse Youth Services to really end homelessness for all young people, and LGBT youth was one group that we've really been focusing on and wanting to focus more on. So as a community, really coming together over this issue, all the partners, all the community members absolutely said yes.
Great. And Kelly, I'm wondering if you can share if there were any concerns about entering into this work in Houston.
So concerns, I think it depends on what part of the community you're talking about. For us as a foundation, we call ourselves the hippy dippies of our community. So we sit on committees, we try to keep our pulse on, what's happening with programs and needs. So we were very excited and interested to see what this could possibly look like. I think where there are questions that still remain is how do we engage better with faith-based partners, because they've been central to a lot of our homeless services work in Houston, providing a lot of the food pantries, basic needs, emergency shelter, and them wanting to figure out how to work with youth, but trying to make sure that we are dialoguing and building capacity within that sector of our community to make sure that they are meeting the goals that we're setting for it.
One of the really interesting things to me about being a part of this work is locally, it really is a community decision, right? Like it really was, it's not one person saying, yes, we're going to do this in Houston and here I go, right? It's really about bringing people to the table, figuring out this is something that could really work in that community. And so I'm wondering, Meredith and Kelly, if you could talk to us a little bit about who those people are in your communities, who the partners are locally, who you may have been surprised to see at the table?
So for us, it's been really most of the community. We've had juvenile justice, we've had healthcare, our mental health. We've carved out behavioral health, which wasn't originally one of the subcommittee areas. We've had funders at the table. We've had some faith groups at the table. I think our biggest surprise group for me was our school districts. Our school district is Mammoth. And it's been very difficult to engage with them in community-based partnerships for the past few years because they've been really focused on testing and reducing dropout rates. So to see our homeless liaisons being able to come to meetings and fully engage in the process, I think was a really good sign to me that folks are beginning to understand that children are whole beings and that if we're not meeting all of their needs, then we're never going to solve some of the other issues that we have going on in our community.
And in Hamilton County, we started at a really great place in that we're one of 18 grantees through the Health and Human Services Youth at Risk of Homelessness planning process. So that's a 2-year planning process that's really looking at older youth in the child welfare system and youth aging out of child welfare. And so we already had this amazing group of organizations together, including juvenile justice, child welfare, the police department, just so many great partners. So we were able, with this opportunity, to invite even more people to the table and really bring in our community organizations that focus specifically on LGBT youth. So we reached out to GLSEN, to PFLAG, the Human Rights Campaign, the Heartland Trans Wellness Group, so really bringing in those leaders. And we also worked with education and with young people. That was an absolute top priority for our planning process, was to make sure that LGBT youth, homeless youth were at the table. And one challenge we face with that is it's hard to show up. It's hard to show up during 9 to 5 when you're in school, when you're working. And so we had to kind of shift our strategy around that to really go where the young people were, and we hosted a series of focus groups. So going to a youth group, going to the homeless shelter, and asking their opinion and meeting them where they are. So they were absolutely a huge partner in our work. And one surprising thing, and I don't know if it was a surprise or not, I feel like our process really kind of snowballed. So, we were working over the 6 months, and more people kept coming to the table, which was really exciting. And some partners we were, grateful to work with the University of Cincinnati. We worked with their LGBT center, and also all the way up to the president of the university. They were involved. His wife was involved. Their daughter. So that was just kind of a surprise to see that engagement from that whole University of Cincinnati. And then one last group I'll talk about is our faith leaders. And that was, it's been really exciting to have them be part of this. And we hear a lot, people have very different experiences within religious communities. And so we have an amazing group of clergy and faith leaders that have come to the table. They want to be spokespeople. They want to open up their churches and really be a resource. So that's been something that has been a great asset.
And I'm really glad you brought up the faith leaders, because that's a question that I'm asked a lot, right? How do you bring faith leaders to the table? And so I don't have concrete answers to answer that question right now, but I'm happy that you're hearing from Meredith, and I think should you be a person who is struggling with that in your own community, they've really done some great work at getting some faith leaders to the table in Cincinnati. The other group of interest that I just want to highlight that you mentioned and ask you to talk about for a quick second is the police. Because, as I mentioned earlier today, the way that we criminalize young people and criminalize homelessness is really important in our country. And I've been really impressed at the participation of the police in Cincinnati. So can you just talk a little bit concretely about what that looks like, what they're doing?
Absolutely. So Lighthouse Youth Services has been partnering with the Cincinnati Police Department and the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office for many years and kind of nurturing that relationship. And in a way that we're now working together is that police officers are committed to serving homeless youth and not criminalizing them. So they now can alert our street outreach staff so that we can go there and help them come to the shelter, receive services that way. So there's a lot of communication that's happening on the streets and really helping us reach out to young people. And particularly in this initiative, we have an amazing police LGBT liaison, and her name is Angie Vance, and she said that there's very few LGBT liaisons across the country, specifically in police departments, and her full-time job is to really be in the community, work on these issues, and so she has really raised awareness within the police department and puts out a newsletter, works with the cops who are out there to help them recognize, to help them contribute to the solution and not criminalize the young people. So she has absolutely been at every meeting and really helping us with that partnership.
Thank you. And Jeff, I wanted to turn to you for a minute as the person that's leading the technical assistance around this project and ask if you have any advice for communities that may be interested in starting a similar initiative in their hometowns.
Why, Jamie, yes I do. So, coincidentally, I have my Jeff's Top 10 list here. So it's been a real honor over the last 6+ months working with Cincinnati and working with Houston to build capacity, to share resources, to engage, and to be at the point now where they're moving forward with submitting their plans and, over the coming month, implementation of the plans. So 10 sort of reflections that I've sort of thought about over the last few days as I think about the last 6 months. The first is, if you're a community that wants to do this work, follow them. We will be, through the initiative, sharing information about the work in Cincinnati, the work in Houston, through True Colors Fund, through the federal partners, and then through the initiative as a whole. So look for information on that. At some point, the plans will be publicly shared. So the idea is that those can be potentially models as this work moves forward, and we know what is effective and what is beneficial to what other communities can do. Second, don't reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of work. We're hearing about it today. There's a ton of work out there in the field. Use the USICH framework to end youth homelessness. Both communities have grounded their plans, their activities in that framework. Really valuable to moving this work forward. Third, and we heard about this earlier, develop a shared vision. Really key for your stakeholders, for folks to have a sense of what you're working towards. What is your shared vision, and how are you defining the key terms? So there was a lot of conversation in both communities. How are we defining homelessness? That may sound simple to those of us listening today, but it's a difficult question when you have different funding streams and different ways of looking at what's homeless and what's not homeless. So really important to have a shared vision and understanding. Fourth, strong local leaders. I think, as I attested to when we talked about the selection criteria, we wanted communities that had some capacity, that had some infrastructure that would be a sign that they're likely to be successful. And we've seen that shine through in both communities in terms of the strong local leads stepping in, using their management skills, using their facilitation skills to get people to the table, build buy-in, and move the planning process forward. And I think that's important to do in other communities as well. And where it's lacking, bring in capacity building supports to do that work. Fifth, as Jayma noted earlier today, the importance of research and data. Not just tapping national data, but looking at what data you have locally. And both communities did a sort of a needs assessment. So interviews, youth think tanks in Cincinnati, getting some anecdotal information from providers. Very helpful to laying the groundwork for this work. You can't do it if you don't have that larger context of the need and also the strengths in your community. Both are really critical, and both plans emphasize that. Fifth, Or 6, dream big. Be bold and don't be afraid to fail. It's okay that if some of the strategies and activities have to be pushed back, have to be rethought, have to be dropped, but do what you think in terms of a plan, what you think is needed to end LGBT homelessness in your community. 7th, be collaborative. I've heard a lot today, it's a theme of the conference about collaboration. Can't be understated, the importance of collaboration. And both communities, as you've heard so far, that's a tenet of their work. So involving all those systems from child welfare to juvenile justice and having structures in place to engage them and build awareness and buy-in. 8th, engage philanthropy and the funding community early on. Don't wait until you have a plan, do it early. And we have other folks here from the Freeze Foundation in Houston who have been great assets locally. And the sooner you can get your funding community involved, the sooner you can get them to buy into and be thinking about how this work can be infused into their strategic priorities. 9th, test and measure what's working. So do your continuous quality improvement, and both communities are just now about to begin implementation, but I would say that's a really key recommendation is as you move forward, be sure to look at what's working and then shift course as needed. And then lastly, and I think this goes to what Ms. Locker said earlier today, is act quickly. We don't have time to waste. Every minute that goes by, there's a youth that's still homeless, experiencing homelessness. And I think as difficult as it was, as challenging as it was for both communities to participate in this 6-month intensive planning process, they both committed to it, I think, because they knew how important this is. And I would say as great as it would be to have a year or 2 years to do a wonderful planning process, don't do it. Stick to a tight turnaround and make it happen.
Thanks, Jeff. I love your top 10 list. I'm going to get you to drop a couple of those for me for other things. A couple of things that Jeff mentioned that I want to highlight is the strong local leadership, that was really important. And that can't exist without collaboration, right? So it's not that one person. It's a group of people with a shared vision that have really come to the table over and over and over again, even when their plates are already full. Because how many people in the room have a full plate right now? You feel like? Okay. I know more of you than that, and I know your plate is really full. So you all have full plates. But somehow they've managed to do it. So when Jeff says, follow these communities, look at their work, don't reinvent the wheel, I just want to say that again. Because I think so often we get into our own sort of bubble, if we're doing our own work and we're doing the work really well, and then we think, oh, we also need to do this thing. So we start doing it and doing it. Meanwhile, in Houston and Cincinnati, they have this whole thing figured out already. It's going to save you a little bit of time, right? So hopefully there will be some strategies that come out of this that can inform the work in your community around prevention. And like Ann said earlier, we haven't really historically done prevention that well. And so that's why this is different, and that's why this is really exciting, and that's why the work that happens at the local level is so invigorating, because it's all these people coming together and recognizing, hey, like, we didn't get this right yet. So you know what? Let's get our wildest, craziest ideas out on the table, because that's where we need to go. All of our hopes and dreams about what this could potentially look like, we're not crossing any of it off the list just yet. No, we don't have funding for it. We're putting it in the plan. Because guess what? We've got a great, engaged funding subcommittee led by Nancy from Houston, and I bet we're going to find some resources to make this actually happen. So it's been really inspiring. So thank you.
Sure.
I'm wondering, maybe I can just start with Ann on this one. We can go down the line. I'm wondering if you have any sort of initial lessons learned from this process that people might take with them home when they go to start doing something like this in their own communities.
So I can really only talk about what I see from the federal level. And I know that we've tried a couple of other times to do a pilot program. We tried one with our HPRP funding, the Recovery Act funding that we had a few years ago, in a city where we were reacting to a tragedy. There was a fire that killed a number of homeless youth within a community, and we reacted. And I think that the upside obviously was that we were able to funnel some money and get some services to the youth in that community. But what we didn't do was create lasting change. And that really is, if I had something to push folks on from my perspective, is to take the opportunity when it comes up. When you get a letter from, I don't know whether it was from me or from Mark or the secretary, I can't remember, but when you get one of those letters, take that opportunity to create capacity and lasting change, because I think it's our role as the government to push innovation and to push communities into maybe being outside of their comfort zone, just as much as sometimes I'm outside of mine.
So I have a lot of lessons learned. I will share a few of them with you and happy to talk more if you're interested in doing this work. One is just the importance of collaboration. And in Hamilton County, we really saw this partnership between LGBT identified people and organizations and typical non-LGBT systems, right? So we had a huge learning curve among, just groups coming together for the first time. And actually, I really like the Summit logo, but I'm picturing all of those as different partners in more of a Venn diagram. So the sweet spot in the middle, right, where we're all coming together, we're learning. And one of the things that we did at the beginning was have each partner organization share a little bit about who they were, what they did. And through that, we built a foundation of terminology. Some of our partners didn't really know what transgender, what that experience was like, how do you define it, how do you use that term correctly. And so that's just one example of how we really built a shared language and shared understanding across systems. And even for LGBT youth-identified organizations, they're not familiar with HUD funding and the HUD definition of homelessness. So this really was a cross-sector approach, and I think it takes some intention to build that shared experience and that shared language. So that's one lesson learned. Another one, which was a huge benefit, was we had an outpouring of energy and people volunteering, wanting to get involved. And that was incredible, and it really required a solid structure to have people interact with the initiative, participate in the initiative. We wanted every activity to be meaningful, and that was a challenge, right? To make sure we're bringing in the right people at the right times, and they're actually contributing. We're not creating busy work. So that, I think, is a structure that we both have, kind of walking through the process of a needs assessment, smaller working teams that would meet on their own to provide recommendations that would ultimately, focus on the 4 USIC core outcomes of social and emotional well-being, permanent connections, stable housing, and education and employment. So that's an example of, a structure. But definitely, it's a lot of people wanting to volunteer, and you have to be able to hold them all together. So I definitely learned a lot about that. And then the last lesson I will share with you is just about how we support young people in this planning process. And I loved what Ben shared earlier today about, yes, I will tell you my story, but I want something back. And so that's absolutely something our steering committee was 100% committed to. And early on in the process, we reached out to private donors to be able to give us a donation to support young people's participation. So we could offer them a stipend for their time. We could provide them with a meal, so if they showed up, they wouldn't be hungry in this meeting telling us how to prevent homelessness when they're experiencing it themselves. We offered transportation support so they could get bus cards or gas money. So that was a foundation. But even further, when we think about all the media opportunities, and one of our goals is to raise awareness, and media want to hear directly from LGBT youth experiencing homelessness, which we want to give them that platform in a safe way that supports them and helps them grow. So we had a lot of discussions around providing kind of training on strategic sharing, helping a young person know how comfortable they were, knowing that this could be searched on Google for the rest of their lives if they give this interview. So really helping them decide, helping them step up, and that was a process. So I would definitely learned a lot of lessons around that, learning from the young people directly, and would encourage everyone to offer that opportunity for young people to really lead and be spokespeople on this issue that they're experiencing, but do so in a way that connects them with adults and supports them and compensates them for the expertise that they're bringing to this plan. So those are 3 of my lessons.
So I think our first lesson learned is if you reach out to your funders and engage them early, they will show up. Even if they can't come to every meeting. And I think that for our community, this is probably one of the first times that we've had funders and providers actually developing a plan together. And so it is allowing us to manage our expectations, but it's allowing the funding community to get prepared for future requests. It's allowing us to see maybe what programs and models have not been working, but that we've been funding. And has challenged us to think differently about some of our work. So I think that that's been a really key lesson learned for our community. And it's also demystified for our providers who funders are. We can seem really scary sometimes, even though some of us may actually mean to be scary, our intentions are good, right? But the way that we engage with our grantees is not always very relational. And so it's allowed some of our funders to learn how to do program work very differently. And so that's been really, really helpful. I think the other lesson learned, because we're newer in the process in terms of our capacity and our planning, is that we don't know a lot of things. And so there's a lot of education that needs to happen in our community. And so it's been really helpful to hear the subcommittees talk about the types of trainings that we need to have so that we are, as a community, are using shared language and understanding the terminology, but also that our funders know that terminology as well. We just had a Google Hangout where we invited local funders to hear from funders in other parts of the country who have already been engaged in this work. And some of the things that we talked about was, why did they make the investment? How did they get their board's buy-in, right? So what about this work was compelling to their board? And then what types of risks were they willing to take? Because some folks are afraid to take a risk. And some of the work that needs to be done is work that maybe we don't have a lot of research on, and that's the whole purpose of funding that work. And so it was really helpful for our community early in the process to begin to do some of that education. And I think the last lesson learned, and this is coming from someone who did program work, is that we can't other our children any longer. And the way that we talk about our children, the way that we set the goals for this initiative has to be that we want for LGBTQ youth what we want for every youth, right? I want for every homeless youth what I want for my own child. And if we don't have that mindset, then this work is not going to work, right? And so being very intentional in how we talk about the young people and how we include them in our processes is really a lesson that I hope that we're carrying forward.
Right. And Jeff, so you gave us that great top 10 list earlier, which I love. I'm wondering if you can tell us in your best tweetable phrase your hope for this work going forward.
My hope is that we end LGBT homelessness in both communities, and that both communities have measures of success that we can share with other communities, and I hope be replicated in communities around the country. And I think take the lessons learned from this work and improve the work.
Great. And do you have a hope for this work going forward that you could share with us?
I do. I hope that we can teach other communities around the country to take risks, to foster innovation within their own communities and program improvement so we can end LGBT youth homelessness. That's what I hope to get out of it.
So please join me in thanking these amazing panelists who have been working so hard on these plans for the last 6 months. Thank you.